pleasure to see you all. Great turnout today. I'd like to introduce our two speakers today. Joel Briscoe has been my neighbor for 30 years as I do the table. I've known him, gosh, he was a high school teacher in Bountiful for 21 years. History and civics. He does a great impersonation of, I can't remember, was it Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, somebody from the Revolutionary War period. I remember when he was on the Salt Lake School Board and they had the issue around the open school shutting down the class. That was an interesting political experience for me anyway, as an outside observer. He served as chair of the East Central Community Council, and he lives in the same house he's lived in the whole time I've known him, with his wife, Christine, and their 3 kids. He's currently a legislator. He's been active, very active in initiating legislation on behalf of the Great Salt Lake. So he's got a very solid background here. Kelly Hanna is a native of Southern California who moved here to be a ski racer at Roland Hall and stayed. He's got film and photography experience. He graduated from the University of University of Utah. I'm on a roll this morning. I'm going to really shut up at this point. Obviously, I'm not fit to be this position. One thing about Kelly I do want to bring up, though, is he's an incredible photographer. I've seen some of his pictures in the magazine Friends that Friends of the Great Salt Lake puts out. He's got some great photos in there, and he currently has an exhibit of 30 photographs up at the state capitol. And if you get a chance to take a look at them, there's some very, very good photographs there. With that, I'll conclude my fluent and erudite introduction and turn it over to Joel Briscoe.
My wife says I should wear a sign. History teacher, ask questions at your own risk. Next slide, please.
You're in control.
I'm in control. That's kind of scary. Oh, good, it read. I really like the blue and the green, and I wasn't sure that the titles and the typography would show. Saving the Great Salt Lake. Let's just dive right in. This is the watershed. It's not quite, I thought it would look almost exactly like Lake Bonneville. It doesn't, but it does include parts of Wyoming, Idaho, and Nevada. Given that Bear Lake is between 50 and 60% of the water that fills the lake. Most of the rest is Weber and Jordan, rainfall, some other items. We're all familiar with this slide. This low, I remember reading about it in my weekly reader in elementary school, about the low of the Great Salt Lake. The current low, and I remember driving down I-15, because when I was working in Davis County, I was up and down I-15 a bit. And I remember the water lapping at I-15 in Centerville. I mean, if we ever get that much water again, that'd be a nice problem to have, right? Linda Freitas loves to show this chart. I can't tell you everything that's on it, but everything across the top is a metric that's measured about the lake. And the green is like optimum, and the orange is like not so good. That's all you need to know for the purpose of this chart. Now, the higher the lake level is toward the top, the lower the lake level is toward the bottom. The more water there is on the lake, you see that there's some things that are benefited and some things are not benefited. The big two red bands are the place we'd like to be in the middle. Last year we were here. We're up a little bit this year because we had just a phenomenal water. The climate research scientists at Utah State tell me they think we'll have 2-3 years of good water. They think we're in that cycle. My only concern about that is people thinking we're done. See, you guys just were trying to fool us and scare us. See, we're over. We have no need to go any further. Let's talk a little bit about legislative history. Back in '91, the legislature said, well, we're going to develop the Bear River. We're going to put all kinds of dams and reservoirs, and we're going to deliver 220,000 acre feet of water a year to Cache County, Box Elder, Weber County, Davis County, Salt Lake County. And they said, we got to have this water by 2015 or else we're just not going to have enough water. So much for future planning, right? Because that was 8 years ago. We haven't seen any water. We're okay. And we still haven't touched, in my opinion, conservation. In 2006, also before I was up there, you can't blame me for this, we said we're going to develop Lake Powell. There was only one no vote in the Senate and the House. Jim Dunnigan. If I'd been there, there would have been 2 no votes. If Representative Wade had been there, there would have been 3 no votes. Everyone else said, this is great. Let's just stick a straw into the Colorado River, Lake Powell, and let's take 83,000 acre feet and let's push it through 5 pumps and let's dump it into Washington County. $1.3 to $2.2 billion, according to the people who want it. Critics say it'll be much more. Bear River development, 1.5 to 2.8 billion. So using their math, not our math, 2.5 to over $5 billion. But if we got $1 billion for a gondola, who's counting, right? On a better note, in 2010, the legislature creates the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. 11 people appointed by the governor, and they're to advise the Department of Natural Resources, Environmental Quality, Forest, Fire, and Sovereign Lands on the development of Great Salt Lake. Look at the language in terms of balancing sustainable use, environmental health, reasonable access for current and future development. That was 13 years ago. There was an update in 2014, and things started to happen about 4 years ago, 2019. Tim Hawks sponsored in-stream flow water right amendments. This is essential because prior to this legislation, everything in the water system is geared to use or lose. If you don't use your water within 7 years, the state engineer can say, well, you're not using your water, you just forfeit it. So we passed legislation that says, no, a legitimate use of your water is putting it into a stream, inflow. And I think we allow them to do that for 10 years. That's going to have to change. That's going to have to go beyond 10 years. You've been efficient, you decided to cut back the acreage you're planting. Your company's got a new method of using water you don't use as much. Well, dedicate it, put it in the Provo River, put it in the Bear, put it in the Weber, which will go into the Great Salt Lake. I sponsored legislation which said, the state should set an example. We've got this gorgeous Capitol building complex. We've got 40 acres of land, all this green grass. Let's save water. It didn't pass because I offended one person. And I would have gone to talk to her if someone told me I should have. So she made sure the bill didn't go anywhere. But the people who run the Capitol grounds told me they think they're saving that. I've asked Salt Lake City Utilities to tell me if we legitimately are saving that much water. The governor was Lieutenant Governor then, Lieutenant Governor Cox. He's in charge of Capitol Preservation Board, which is in charge of the Capitol complex. I said, can we do a water audit of the Capitol? He said, sure. So USU, Water Research, Salt Lake Utilities did an audit. It took them 100 pages, but they're research people. I'm just a policy guy. What USU and Salt Lake City Utilities said was if the Capitol grounds would fix their pipes, there's a few irrigation pipe problems, if they would change the way they water in July and August without taking out 1 square foot of sod, we could save between 30 and 35% of the water. Remember that figure. Senator Andrig ran Senate Bill 52, passed it, which said if you're going to build a new secondary water meter system, you have to meter it. So if you have ever lived or have family or friends who live in Weber, Morgan, Davis counties, there are 300,000 secondary water. I water my mom's front yard 2 days a week. She's got 5 taps outside. It's not culinary water from Bountiful City. It's Weber Basin water. It's secondary water. It's not potable. It's not drinkable. I drank it as a kid, which my wife says explains everything. Because you're 4 years old, is cold water coming out of a hose. My mother pays a flat amount per year according to the square footage in her lot. Now, they put in a secondary water meter this year because we passed laws saying by 2030, everyone who has secondary water has to meter. My good friend from Cedar City and committee said, well, no one needs to know how much water you're using. You open your blinds and you look at your trees and your grass and your garden and you know how well you're doing, which is how. So my mom will start getting statements saying, this is how much water you use compared to everyone else. And Senator Iwamoto said, well, we really ought to study water banking in Utah. We'll come to that later. But here's the big piece of 2019. House Concurrent Resolution 10, concurrent resolution to address declining water levels. Now, 9 years earlier in 2000 or whatever that previous, we're just going to form a group and we're going to advise everyone on the Great Salt Lake. This is focused in 2019. The governor and the legislature recognize we need adequate water flows to the lake and its wetlands to have a healthy lake. We need an overall policy to administer water flow to the lake and its wetlands and to increase the lake level. We charged the departments of natural resources and environmental quality to expeditiously, jointly, collaboratively work with stakeholders to develop recommendations for policy and other solutions. So much of what we've done flows from this resolution. Some resolutions are just worth the paper they're on. This one helped and this one mattered. I'm going to shift focus now and I'll tie it back for you. A book I highly recommend if you're interested in air quality. And we're interested in the Great Salt Lake, many of us, because we're interested in air quality. Because we know that there's a strong link, essential link, between the health of the lake and the quality of the air we breathe. She is an epidemiologist, she's a toxicologist and an author. When Smoke Ran Like Water, you know what? I left out a few slides. This is not the one I wanted, but I'll just fill in. She was raised and born in Denora, Pennsylvania. In Denora, Pennsylvania, 4 years before the London smog, they had, just like the London smog that killed 4,000 people, and today they think killed 10 to 20,000 people and made 100,000 people sick. 20 people died. It's like Utah. It has a bend in the river. It has had an inversion. There were a metal plant. There were some metal plants there. The people operating the plants didn't shut them down until the 5th day, and that was the day the rain came and ended the inversion. That was where Deborah Davis lived. Saw family members die of cancer early. 1/3 to 50% of the people in the town, 14,000 people, got sick. Some people say it is what jump-started the movement to really tighten down and get some really decent air quality laws in the United States. Her book describes how industry and business prevents anyone from really doing anything about it until we force their hand, and it takes way too long to really do the things that people know should be done much more quickly. woman who was born a few miles away who is one of my heroes, and not many people know about, is Dr. Mary Amder. She was born in 21, got a chemistry degree in 44, got a PhD in 46, started studying pollution, toxicology, and pollution. At the time, the way we measured pollution was we put some animals in an enclosure, put the gas in. If less than 50% of them died, we said it's good to go. That was not good enough for her, and she and her husband worked on after working for a place a couple of years, she went to public health at Harvard University, and she and her husband worked on a plan for using guinea pigs with much more subtle means of measuring much lower levels of poisonous gases, sulfur dioxide, etc., nitrogen oxide. Her boss at Harvard got a big grant from a company that makes metal and puts out a lot of sulfur dioxide, and they wanted him and Harvard Public Health to point out that they didn't really cause anything that happened at Donora, Pennsylvania. Her research showed that that was false. She went and gave a presentation. She was warned not to give it again. The next year, 1950-something, she went to give it again. She says two very large men got in an elevator with her, crowded right next to her, suggested that she not give her presentation at the conference. She gave her presentation at the conference. She went back to Boston. Her boss at Harvard told her to take her name off the paper and not to submit it for publication. It was submitted for publication already and accepted the Lancet, which is one of the gold standards. Her paper was never published. She lost her job at Harvard. She never received tenure until she retired finally at MIT in 1996. She never quit. A man who's now a director of one of the more important programs at Harvard Public Health was giving his PhD in the 1970s, named John Spengler, and this is what he said about her. This is my point today. I used to think that in science it was sufficient to publish an important finding once. Amder's work showed how foolish this notion was. At every stop along the way, people tried to pull the rug out from under her. In fact, she got it right years before the rest of us. The world only caught up with her several decades later, by which time so many people had confirmed what she had found, it could no longer be discounted. It is not enough to be right. You have to publish your findings on something subject to controversy over and over and over again. You can change the last sentence. We know, we believe, we know what air pollution and toxicity in air does. Lots of people know. It's not enough to state it once. That's never enough. It doesn't get it all done. We know a lot of things that some people are pushing back against. I have another version that I finished off this morning, had more slides, and that's fine. I can give those to you later. I'm just going to close with this before we move over to Kelly. My daughter was married at Fielding-Gar Ranch on Antelope Island. So it's more than just policy to me. It's more than just a good thing we should do. I work on climate change and clean air issues because my wife has asthma. I call her my canary in the coal mine. We go outside and we see dirty air. My wife says, well, if you were me and felt like you had a 5-pound weight on your chest every time you breathed, that's what it's like. That's what dirty air is like. So I have a personal investment in the Great Salt Lake. It's not an ugly place. It's never been an ugly place. We've learned to appreciate it. It's the beauty and its aridity. We don't live in Southern California, we live in Utah, and in its own way, it is every bit as beautiful and stunning, as Kelly is going to show you. You have my commitment that I'm going to fight these battles over and over and over until we get where we need to be. And I thank you for being here today. And I look forward to seeing the gorgeous pictures Kelly's going to show us.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you all for having me here today. Joel, I think beyond the work that we're called to do within ourselves, that work within ourselves that sometimes we don't do, you are doing the most difficult work there is. Up on the Hill, with 103 of your fellow legislators, plentiful with dramatically different views on every task at hand, working to pass good legislation that works for all of us. Thank you. I'm honored to be here with you today. You may find my discourse here today a little bit unconventional. You won't hear me talk about how many acre-feet of water we need to get into the lake to get it to its sweet spot. You're not going to hear me talk about the dust that blows from that dry lake bed up onto our snowpack, shortening our winters, or the arsenic levels in that dust that we breathe when those storms roll through. You're not going to hear me talk about the pelican colony at Gunnison Island that's not there this year because it's not an island anymore. So, thank you for being open to some new perspectives. Thank you for considering the unconventional, because convention alone will not get us through these challenges we're facing. It first hit me about a decade ago, mind-bending at the edge of my comprehension. We had saved for a family sailing trip in the British Virgin Islands, a bareboat charter, and it was beautiful. The sea, the sky, salt water in the air, and at night, looking into that southern hemisphere, seeing those stars and that Southern Cross hanging there was so beautiful. And the next morning, we wake up to find dust on the boat, a layer of dust on the boat. It was everywhere, and it was curious. We take a dinghy into shore, more red dust on everything, on the docks, on the cars, and the plants. And we met a new friend that day who told us that dust had blown in from the Sahara Desert overnight. What? What, the Sahara Desert? The Sahara Desert in Africa? That one? 3,000 miles. A 3,000-mile journey across that ocean. And just partway through that journey, some of that dust was dropped onto those islands. It was profound, and it was extraordinarily simple at the same time, like that snow globe scene we've all held in our hands. It was the first time that I realized how small our planet really is, and that if we were big enough, me and you, we could wrap our arms around it. And if we had wings, we could fly across its hemispheres. These are not hot springs in Reykjavik. They're not crystal hot springs either. It wasn't until just a few years ago I had my first-hand experience with a dust storm out at Great Salt Lake. Out there, in the wind, watching it, I followed it. Those north winds blowing south across the Bear River Bay, stirring up that dust and blowing all the way down along the Wasatch Front. This particular storm moved through Clearfield, Farmington, Salt Lake City, West Jordan, Draper, Lehigh, Saratoga Springs. Not a transatlantic journey, but substantial. I first learned about Great Salt Lake in the 4th grade. I grew up in a small mountain town in Southern California, and we were assigned a research project on a capital city. So I was a ski racer. Of course, I picked Salt Lake City, the greatest snow on earth. Like, how could I not do that? I sent away to the Chamber of Commerce for more information, snail mail, the only kind of mail at the time, and waited excitedly, anxiously for weeks. Waited for weeks, and finally, that thick manila envelope was delivered to the house with all the information a 4th grader could ever want about Salt Lake City, Utah, and our Great Salt Lake. 4 years later, I found myself moving here to attend Romark Ski Academy. Was driving into town from Lake Tahoe with my dad from a ski race, and we're coming in, passing Wendover, passing the Bonneville Salt Flats, 1986, the lake at its high water mark, some of that water mark that Joel was talking about on I-15. We're driving in on I-80, the I-80, a ribbon of road leading straight into Salt Lake, and it was windy, and those waves were crashing and spraying up and over the interstate, windshield wipers on. And that was the first time I met her, this Great Salt Lake. And she's woven into my life ever since. So I'd like to introduce you maybe a little better to this friend of mine today, this Great Salt Lake. It wasn't until my first existential crisis that I really discovered the lake. My early 20s, struggling with that gap between the lofty ideals and dreams I had dreamed and this gravity-ridden, unforgiving earth that we walk upon. Suicidal level crisis. And I found solace out at this lake in her open expanse, her slow waters. Those salty waters are thick and viscous. They move slowly, and they turn down time just a little bit. And this lake provided me respite from that heart-wrenching struggle that I was grappling with that gap between heaven and earth. That soul storm story is for another time. Today, I'd like to skip forward to that second soul storm that rolled into my life 20 years after that. I lose my dad in a car accident. The following year, my father-in-law at the time falls from the roof of his 3rd-story condo to his own death. The dog dies. And from there, it's like a country song gone sideways, skipped out of the groove. And I am in crisis, and I find myself called back to this lake from something outside of me, compelled to get back to those waters. This time to her more ancient lake bed to the west. The Lucin Cutoff. It's where the railroad has turned for over 100 years to bisect the lake into its north and its south arms, and also site of the sun tunnels. So in haste, with some urgency, reaching out from this crisis, I pack up the minivan this time, and I head west on I-80, that direction, on some kind of mission. And as I'm heading west on I-80, right past exit 114, where I first met this lake, decades and decades before, years and years, I drive into a fog bank. And I spend the next 24 hours in that fog, having the most profound experience of my life. that lake had called me back. Hours and hours later, my MapQuest maps, my printed maps, they note that I had arrived. I'm looking at the maps. I'm there. The GPS on my phone said I had arrived at my destination, at those sun tunnels. And all I could see was the ground beneath my feet and a few meters in any direction. There were no sun tunnels. There was no sun. Only the fog. I had reached my destination, but the destination was no different than the path that I was on right there in that moment. I didn't want to leave the van. I didn't have a compass with me. It could have been, this was February, could have been out there lost forever, no way to get back. I woke up the next morning. I'm not doing that yet. I woke up the next morning, there was still no sun, and there were still no sun tunnels, only fog. And to this day, that 24 hours in the fog, tears in that fog, seeing the face of God, F-O-G. So grateful to have spent that day in the face of God. You know, advocating for the lake over the last several years, I'm often asked, what can I do to save the Great Salt Lake? And it's a really easy answer, call Joel. He'll do it. He'll do it up on the hill with 103 of his fellow representatives and senators. I think the real answer is closer to ourselves. The real answer is closer to ourselves. Ultimately, it's my choice that will save this lake. And it's your choice that will save this lake. It's also Joel's choice and our children's choices. Not any choice, but that choice that is passionately connected to our hearts and also grounded by the same gravity that we walk through every day. A tangible pursuit. Each pursuit, like a drop of water, over and over and over, that turns into rain. Rain that flows to the river, that river that flows through the Grand Canyon, or the Weber, or City Creek. Those raindrops, we each need to find a connection with our raindrop. With a bird, with a plant, with a canyon, with the air or the water, or with some other cause that opens up your heart, if for no other reason than just because. It's these reflections that I prize the most. The reflections of the sky and the sea, where the horizon disappears and demands a reorientation, a recalibration of the compass, a new landscape. Here at this lake are the reflections of you and the reflections of me, where we become them and they become us. You know, a few weeks ago, I was working on a breathing workshop at the Patagonia outlet, and as we were looking at some of these satellite images that we've all seen, I couldn't help but think that this lake actually looks like a lung. Our local respirator. And it's more anemic today than it was yesterday, but a lung nevertheless. A lung nevertheless. You know, our own lungs are roughly 80% water, salt water even. We are saltwater beings too. And invariably, we're an integral part of this watershed. And invariably, if we pull too much water from those waterways, we lose our balance. And we've lost our balance. It's Antelope Island. You know, the farmers and the ranchers use the water to grow the food we eat. We know that. The extraction companies use the water to mine and refine the minerals and elements that we all use every day, like magnesium and lithium coming down the pike quickly. Pick a product, and you'll likely find an element or a mineral from Great Salt Lake in that product, whether you're drinking Coke or Coors or Pacifico. There's Great Salt Lake magnesium in that can. And sometimes I wonder about an advocacy campaign to save the lake for the sake of the cans. Because sometimes the value of 10 million birds may just be too intangible. The brine shrimp, they're a critical base layer in our food chain, our worldwide food chain. I'll always know them best as sea monkeys. Ironically, when those sea monkeys show up in the snail mail, marketing says instant life, instant pets. When they show up in that snail mail, they come with explicit growth instructions. Instructions for time, temperature, water levels, and water composition. Right there in that snail mail. And while I haven't grown sea monkeys since I was a child, I do make it a point to go swim with them and enjoy Great Salt Lake's legendary back floats, like this one just a few weeks ago with my partner Andrea. If you haven't done it, it'll change your life. Get out there. The back floats alone may be worth saving this Great Salt Lake. I'd never seen the end of a river until this day. Last year, 2022, flying in a small plane over Great Salt Lake, like those birds, looking down, seeing the end of the Bear River right there. And it stirs a memory from my childhood, leaving my rocket pop on the sidewalk while my attention had been diverted by something else. And returning to it, seeing my rocket pop melting on the sidewalk, that puddle, that meniscus of that rocket pop evaporating on the sidewalk. That rocket pop alone may be reason enough to save this Great Salt Lake. You know, science has noted that roughly 11 feet of our lake's drop is due to human diversions. It's pretty simple, like that snow globe scene we've all held in our hands. 3 million, roughly 3 million, the term's water users, 3 million water users along the Wasatch Front, each of us with a straw in those waterways taking from it. And today we have more than double the number of water users than we did in 1986 when the lake was at its highest water levels. Let's say its highest water levels outside of geologic time. That's fair. 40 years ago. Just 40 years ago. Of course, climate and weather play a role, but the root cause of our water shortage is our use. It's our use. And there is a profound beauty in that we've created the problem, and it's also our problem to solve. It's our problem to solve, and it reduces to our personal accountability. This lake, where the earth meets the sky, and the skis and the sea, offers reflections of who we are, reflections of the choices we make, and perspectives. Next time you're taking a shower, before you start to wash up, turn the water off. Turn it off. Consider it a dare. Everybody in here, up there too. Consider it a dare. Do your washing without that everlasting cascading water flowing over you. And notice your thoughts. Just notice your thoughts. It's not about the 5, 10, or 20 gallons conserved, although it may be if we were talking about gasoline. But notice your thoughts and take a moment to consider the valves and the gates and the trenches that the farmers and the miners and the ranchers turn toward their operations. The mechanism is the same. The valves are the same, and the heart of the choice is the same too. And it's not all that different for the directors of our water districts or our legislators or our city planners, while I'm standing in the shower thinking, I don't want to turn the water off because I might get cold. I might get soap in my eyes. Let it run. So try it once. Here's the big one. Double dog dare. It's a double dog dare. Take it home and try it. Last year, I was supposed to go to that a while ago. There's an evaporation pond. Last year, I created a lake-focused advocacy campaign for our legislators. It was a limited edition series of prints, signed and numbered, one for each of our legislators. And the third in that series was called Flight. And it talked about the history of flight and our astounding capacity as human beings to dream a dream and achieve it, and to set a goal and to reach it. Our admiration of flight over the years and our achievement of it. The flight of one bird alone may be reason enough to save this Great Salt Lake. And we're fighting for the millions of birds that fly through this flyway every year, transversing the hemispheres of our planet. Transversing the hemispheres of our planet on those light wings, like angels. And they stop here for respite. They stop here. These birds grace us with their presence. They raise their families here on the shores of this Great Salt Lake, just like us. It's the rare occasion I meet somebody who's been out to the lake more than once or twice, many times not at all, and often only to her brine fly frayed edges. And it's hard to fight for the fray. So here's the challenge. Get out to the lake. Take a friend. Get out there and gaze at her reflections. Look deep. Look at your own reflections in that slow water and watch it wave. Look deep for that thing in your heart, that thing that's a magnitude beyond you, that stirs your passion, and embrace it. Hot pursuit. These are the hot pursuits that will get water to this lake. The irrational choices that flow from the truth of our hearts and live in this gravity-ridden reality that we're all walking through. With humility and passion, each of those pursuits like a drop of rain. Thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Bliss. We have some water shares in Utah Lake Distributing, and I was wondering if any of the water share companies, the irrigation companies, are working with the legislature or committees to do any kind of conservation. Or we go to the meetings and I don't hear anything about it, but I did hear that. I mean, for a while they were telling us, use your water shares, because if you don't, you'll lose them. So I appreciate that legislation. Thank you.
The Speaker Wilson, 2 years ago, we put $40 million into creating I can't remember the names of everything, but they selected two groups. One of them is the Audubon Society, and the other one of them is Nature Conservancy, and the directors thereof. And their job, I think, is to help direct and help get water into the lake. One of the things, a week ago, Saturday, I was the Miller campus, Salt Lake Community College, 90th South and Sandy, and we just spoke about the lake, and I spoke with Representative Snyder this week. One of the things we don't know now is, okay, so we do this, is it going to get in the lake? So I give you these shares, is it going to get in the lake? This city, this business, this irrigation company, this rancher donates X shares to the lake. Is it going to get into the lake? We don't know well enough. And our next big step is going to be putting more instrumentation into the rivers, into this. The lake is easy. My mother needed them to dig into her parking strip and put in a new meter so that we can tell her exactly how much water she uses. The lake, you go out and measure it. Is it going up? Good. Is it going down more than it should be compared to the time of year? Not good. But is it coming from here, from here, from here, from here? And we're going to know better. A lot of the things we put in place are going to take time to implement. Water banking, figuring it out is going to take some good people, men and women, working on making it happen. So, I mean, I thought the LDS Church could give more than they gave, because they certainly have access to enormous amounts of water. But people that I trust were excited because they said, well, this should open the floodgates. We'll see, right? I do appreciate, one of the things I do deeply appreciate about Kelly's presentation, besides its great beauty and its personal witness, is that we're not going to get this solved by having someone else fix it for us. I think that's not the way to approach this. A guy said, oh, Briscoe, I got it all figured out. We're going to pump water from West Thumb out of Yellowstone because they have so much more water than they need. Or we're going to dump it in the Lewis, which is going to flow into the Snake. And then somewhere around before Twin Falls, we're going to take it 80 miles into the north end of the lake. Well, then we don't have to do anything. We can continue to overwater our lawns. We continue to plant lawns. We can continue to waste. Everyone should solve this problem. We should all have to do the things we need to do to responsibly live in this beautiful place that we live. So we should dialogue, and I'm hoping that there's more dialogue soon about how we can share. The legal mechanisms are starting to be put in place.
I had to get Darlene to help me up. Bernie Hart, question, because I think we're just poking around the fringes of the real problem. And there's a gondola being built up in the canyons to attract more tourists and more people to Salt Lake. And Utah is a beautiful place, and there's a lot of money made out of tourism and marketing Utah as a place to. I can hear you. Hold it closer? Yeah, okay. Yeah, to promote this great state and how wonderful it is, and we know we have a high rate of births and all these type of things. So if we turn off our sprinklers and have more kids and build more houses and create a need for more straws, no matter how we ration the straws over time, aren't we just increasing the problem, and our solutions are based on what we can do now? But really, it needs systematic change and new thinking. So my question is anybody in this fine, wonderful state thinking big picture solutions rather than momentary, let's burn a few straws and, raise less cattle and get rid of a wheat field and bring water in from somewhere else, because those are not solutions to the long-term problem. So thank you.
When I was teaching at Bountiful High School, Governor Levitt came out to film a public service announcement. He gave a half-hour assembly. He took 15 minutes and told the kids how much growth was happening to Utah. Said, drive down I-15 and double everything you see west of it. We've already embarked on that project in Salt Lake. That's adding, like, picking up Sandy in Salt Lake and copying them and adding them to west of I-15. Every time I get a chance to talk about air quality, I ask people, if we build out, add these other 2 million people, 3 million people to Utah, and we build to the west of I-15 the way we build out the east, are we going to get a handle on our air problems? It's partly the question you're asking. Some people are starting to talk about it. Some of the sewage treatment people in Davis County came and said, well, if you save all this water and then just continue to use it the way you're using it, what have we gained? So this is one of our challenges. People have awakened to the immediate need, as you pointed out. We need to be, instead of thinking in years, we need to be thinking in terms of decades. We're going to have to do this for 10 years and then maybe for another 10 years and for another 10 years. Some of us aren't going to be here in 10, 10, and 10. And so that's a challenge for us to think in those kind of time frames. But we're going to have to start thinking in those kind of, I had a Republican friend in the legislature ask someone, we're looking at tree ring, dendrochronology, tree ring data that is showing over the last 1,200 years, multiple droughts, some of them 60 years long. Are we in year 18 or 19 of a 20-year drought? Are we in year 18 or 19 of a 60-year drought? And if you don't know that, and you're willing to admit you don't know that, maybe that changes the way you see things and do things. And that's the question you're asking, and it's the question that we should be asking. You're right.
I am going to start putting my drip irrigation in tomorrow for this great project that the legislature funded through the water districts. So this lawn replacement program, it's a great program. My question is, and I actually have two questions. One of them, do you know how successful that program has been, and do you know that it's going to continue? It's one question.
It needs more money. I know we put $3 million into it. I know some water conservation districts were doing some work previous to this. The goal was to take it more statewide than simply the Jordan River, Jordan Valley, or others. So I haven't seen that data yet. I told you a little bit of detail about the water audit that I had done at the Capitol, because even with, I would think the Capitol would look nice with some xeriscape gardens, with some low water plant gardens. We're building this gorgeous new museum behind the Capitol. Wouldn't it be great to have some gardens showing some of the various flora of Utah? Just like you can go to Jordan Conservation and see various different ways of using less and less. Look, if you want, here's a way of getting less grass. Here's a way of getting even less grass. Here's a way of having a lawn of having a front yard without grass. Maybe we should do that at the Capitol and even use less water. I've stopped watering my grass, except my wife insists on the backyard. I'm just watering under the trees and the plants.
My other question is just how scared is the Utah Legislature. Just how committed are they to fixing this? Is this?
I'm
does
not.
everybody
I'm not
get it?
concerned. I'm not concerned about right now. I'm concerned about long term, because legislators have ADHD like everyone else. Okay, we can stay focused for a certain period of time on something. How long can we stay focused? So, like American society, we react to crises. This is the crisis. Can we do this for 10 years? That's the challenge. I mean, we put $500 million in last year. I didn't save my current version, which is why I didn't have all my slides. I mean, we put $200 million into agriculture optimization. That's a good down payment, but we need that kind of money for 10 years to really help. Now, and I want to give you some hope. I also want to be realistic, but a week ago Saturday, we're talking to a farmer who also has a master's degree in mechanical engineering. He and his father have a 250-acre farm. He's changed the way he irrigates his farm. It's called flood irrigation, surge irrigation. It cost him, he said, $2,400 an acre. I figure it's between $600,000 and $700,000 for his farm to finance. He has tracked 2000 to 2022, 2020 to 2022. He has saved between 30 and 35% of the water he used to expend in irrigating his farm. Now, that's a lot of savings, 30 to 35%. It's going to take us a lot of upfront dollars to help farmers do that. It can be done. People are showing that it can be done.
We've got a question here from Zoom. Carol Strawn has written in saying, thanks to Joel Briscoe and Kelly Hanna for their eloquent advocacy for the lake. A question for Representative Joel. If the hundreds of members and friends of the First Unitarian Church let their legislators know that they want the Great Salt Lake saved, could it make a difference? If so, what are a couple of the most effective ways to raise our voices?
Have you lobbied? What's effective for you? You start. I've answered. I'll answer.
I thought you were getting all the hard questions.
He answers them well.
It is, before Joel takes over, I think it is important to share your voice. And I do know, there are days you can get up to the legislature and lobby in person, live and in person, meet your legislators. Here's step number one. Go up there and find them and say hello and shake their hand and say thank you. Then express your concern. But meet them first. It's all, without the personal connection, we've got nothing. And I had another thought. Maybe it'll come back, but it just went away.
Individual activity matters. I mean, when I was teaching U.S. history to my students, I mean, you think about all of the movements in U.S. history that helped bend the arc of justice, as Martin Luther King so beautifully talked to us about. You think about women's rights. You think about the environmental movement. You think, none of these were started by politicians. They were started in congregations. They were started around dinner tables. They were started by men and women, often women in times when men wouldn't allow them roles in society. And they said, this is not the society we want. We want a different, better society. We want to live in a different culture. We're going to go out and change it. And individuals have made a difference. Introduce yourself. In person is great. Send them an email. Hey, I'm your constituent. Put your address on there. They'll be able to look at it and know if you live in their district. Hey, I'm a taxpayer and a voter, and I'm registered, and I appreciate your service, and I want you to know that I've been reading up on the Great Salt Lake and how important it is to me, and I appreciate the activity, and I look forward to more from the legislature. And then read up on it, and if you can tell them you know about something in particular you want done, and join organizations. Give $50 a year to Linda Freitas and Friends of Great Salt Lake. Her newsletter will keep you up on what's happening. There are other great organizations Friends of Great Salt Lake is one of the best. Audubon does great work. Nature Conservancy is doing great work. Wonderful organizations that will keep you abreast of what's happening and will tell you where points are that you could say something that would help.
I remembered what I was going to say, if I may, real quick, is I'm sure, Joel, you get inundated with tens, hundreds, thousands of emails that are the boilerplate, like copy and paste, just like flood their inboxes with this info. And while I think there's a place for that, I think finding your own voice and what's personal to you and sharing that experience, that's where those seeds really are. Like Joel was just saying, to let them know kind of where you are and what you're thinking about. It doesn't need to be eloquent. It doesn't need to be fully educated on the topic, because we're all figuring this out as we go. But take what you know and what you're connected to and share that.
We're both here at this table because we love the Great Salt Lake. We love the Great Salt Lake and the totality of the Great Salt Lake, but we love it both for very personal reasons. And I always make sure people understand my daughter was married on Antelope Island. And that's not the only reason to love it, but that's one very good reason to love it.
Yeah. Hi. My name is Joan Gregory, and I coordinate an environmental ministry at First Unitarian Church. And as part of our work, I know I'm supposed to ask a question. I'm actually going to tell folks about something there. Okay. As part of our work, we have a Save a Great Salt Lake project that has been going this year. And we have spent time researching, and we have spent time, the amazing Representative Liz Waite has worked with our young adults, our high school kids. They have gone to the legislature. They met with you, Joel. They have been to the Great Salt Lake, and they have learned about the lake. They have taught the younger kids about the lake and what is happening, and they are in the process of doing even more. We are watching what's happening in the legislature through the August interim session and the interim sessions. The interim sessions are critical to what, a lot of the work happens in the interim sessions when we're off on our trips and whatnot, or paying attention to our lives. And not in that big time in January and February, March, when the legislature is in session. A lot of the work has already been done by the legislature by then. We need to be watching what's going on in the legislature between now and then, and building relationships like we do here today and in summer form with our legislators. Talk to our legislators, even our Republican legislators, maybe even more so with our Republican legislators, so they understand that people like us, people like our families and friends, care about this lake and care about what happens to this lake. And we need to continue to work with our organizations, which Friends of Great Salt Lake is awesome. We've got Saving Our Great Salt Lake. We've got organizations that are part of the government, like the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, and the Great Salt Lake Alliance is a group of organizations that are working together. We are part of the Great Salt Lake Environmental Coalition and the Great Salt Lake Interfaith Action Coalition. That means we're trying to organize faith-based communities, spiritual communities, in doing this work. If you would like to be involved in the work that this church is doing, we will have a table out in Elliott Hall, and you can sign up.
To piggyback on that, if I may piggyback on that just a little bit, as Joel was mentioning, the Friends of Great Salt Lake, we've been advocating for the lake since 1999, and for the $35 a year membership fee, the quarterly newsletter alone, with unbiased information, educational information on the lake, and the photos and the poems and everything in there, is worth it in and of itself.
Joan does a great job. There are multiple, I love Friends of Great Salt Lake. Lynn lives across the street from me. Bonnie Baxter has a program at Westminster, I think, sends out regular information. There's lots of ways of getting information about the Great Salt Lake. Joan can help you find them. I can help you find a few.
So today I learned that every raindrop counts, and I asked myself a couple of questions during this. Well, I'm going to confess to you that when I'm taking a shower, when I'm washing my hair, when I'm soaping down, I don't turn that shower off. But I'm here to tell you, beginning right now, beginning tonight, I am a shower conservationist. I'm not stopping here. I'm going to ask every one of you, would you be willing to, beginning tonight, not saying you never do this, would you be willing to take mindful showers? I want to see a show of hands if you're willing to commit to be a shower conservationist. I'm not seeing very... I'm going to take my time and register. I'm remembering every single one of your faces. Furthermore, I'm going to wrap it up by saying, please, seriously, talk to your family members, talk to your neighbors, not just the Republicans. I hope you will all take up the cause of being a shower conservationist. Thank you, presenter.
Thank you to our presenters. Thank you for the great questions, and thank you for your attendance at the Summer Forum. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.